Hello and welcome to the Audiobook Club. In this week's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined with the wonderful audiobook narrator and voice artist, Ana Clements. Anna, thank you so much for joining me on the show. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
Lovely stuff. Now, if we may, I'd love to start right at the very beginning. Can you tell us a little about your background and how you got started in the world of audio and audiobooks?
So I'm Spanish by birth. So my mother was pregnant with me and came over here with my father and my brothers and sisters, and I was born in London. So I grew up in a bilingual household, and what it did for me is that it made me very aware of sounds, of language, of words, of the things people use, phrases that do and don't work in one language or the other. And curiously, children from the same family don't necessarily come out with the same traits, do they? But what it did do for me was create this sort of fascination with accents, the way people speak, why they say what they say, the words they use. And it made me very aware, I guess, of sound and of words. I wanted to get into the creative arts, and my parents thought otherwise. So I studied economics, went off to university, went into finance, met my now ex-husband, moved to the country, had 2 children, and created a life of ordinariness, in a good way. I after the kids were born, I stopped working in an office for a while and started teaching Spanish. So I took a teaching qualification, and I taught Spanish at the community college, which meant I could work in the evenings and then be there to take them to school and stuff. And then as they got older, I got back into accounts and finance and office work and computer organizing systems within companies and that sort of thing. And I hit midlife and sort of realized that I hadn't quite realized my dreams, my awareness of the fact that I'd left behind singing and music, all those things was quite upsetting. So I started taking piano lessons initially, and I took music theory exams and did all this kind of stuff, and then realized it was actually singing I was after. So I moved across into classical singing, did that for 5 years. And through that, got into musical theatre, first sort of local Amdram stuff, and then a couple of professional shows that came through sort of 5-6 years in, that came through town and were looking for local people to employ sort of for the couple of weeks they were there. And suddenly realised I could get paid for this. But I lived in the countryside in North Devon, where there isn't much scope for, the lights and the stage, as it were. And my kids weren't yet at an age where I felt I could just up sticks and disappear for a couple of weeks to London or whatever. So I bought a microphone, started messing around at home. And it was kind of again, I'm fascinated by research. So I spent a lot of time sort of studying sound, how recording works, got into kind of acoustics and the difference between, soundproofing and sound treatment. Did a couple of online courses through Berklee College of Music. Met a guy Gary Turtzer, who does a masterclass, a one-day come along and find out about the industry. And I knew nothing. I knew nothing at all. So I went, and that was my very first demo, my very first experience of kind of the industry. I then, through him, discovered ACX, put up a profile, discovered the pay-to-plays, Voice 123. This is back 7 or 8 years ago. And found a man called Guy Michaels who runs VoiceOver Kickstart, and he then used to do a 6-week free introduction to voiceover, which again gives you an overview of all the different sections within the industry to allow you to see whether your voice is fit for radio or for audiobooks or video games or animation or promos. There's so much that as an outsider people are unaware of, that I needed that kind of grounding to go, oh, okay, I'm not the bank holiday sale girl. I'm, and so I got into long form narration. I got into corporate videos, e-learning, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But the audiobooks just were always calling me. And once I realized that I didn't have to just do royalty share, that people would actually pay me to do this stuff, it became a whole nother sort of set of things to research and investigate. And the fascination sort of has never waned, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's the route in.
That's an incredibly interesting route. There's lots of questions I want to ask based on that. Now, of course, you narrate in both English and Spanish. It's very impressive. Have you always been a fan of language? Were you a young avid reader? Where did this passion for storytelling come from?
I think, sadly, my family wasn't a particularly book-ridden family. You know, a lot of narrators say, I loved books from an early age.
Yeah.
There weren't books at home. We weren't exposed to that kind of thing. I loved the library. The library was my favourite place. And I used to ride my bike up there on a Saturday morning, and just the feel of the library and the smell of books. But it wasn't encouraged. It wasn't something that we did as a family. So I felt kind of odd in that respect. But that sense of language, nevertheless, was always there. And I think the Spanish side of me, that idea of storytelling, of gathering for food and telling stories after meals. And there was always what we call sobremesa, which is over the table. You eat and then you sit and you drink coffee and your granddad tells a story about whatever. And people always have stories to tell. They're very good storytellers, Spanish people. And I think it's that kind of led to this inclusion then into literature and pages that I could then interpret and pass on.
Yeah, has moving into more performance, a performance-based career. Has it been a kind of revelation to you? I read that you said that narrating audiobooks brought you back to yourself and helped find a space to contribute. And I wondered if you'd be able to just expand on what you meant by that.
There's a real sense of connection for me with audiobooks. It's about, I guess it is the storytelling part. It's the connection with the listener that you never really get to meet. But the idea that somebody wants to hear this story absolutely thrills me. And so what audiobooks has allowed me to do is perform without having to be on a stage in the West End. It is that wonderful feeling of being able to interpret every character or every nuance of a book. And even in non-fiction, that passion that authors have for that particular topic, I find that fascinating. The prep behind that, watching them on YouTube giving talks about the book they've written and seeing the excitement that they have, that they then share, is then for me to adopt and then share on their behalf, as it were. So it's wonderful. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it can be incredibly addictive, can't it, once you get through that project? And as you say, and you narrate a lot of non-fiction as well. Do you find that kind of addictiveness, as it say, and I use that word positively, do you find that with the amount of knowledge that you can pick up and you can be, as they say, great at a cocktail party from
absolutely
from this career?
I'm a real avid fan of tidbits of information, that idea of sort of knowing lots about everything or but nothing specifically, and I'm fascinated by facts. I tend to hold sort of little sound bites and little phrases in my head that fascinate me or require me to then. What I'm terrible at when I'm prepping books is going down that rabbit hole of the internet. You start off searching for the author and then you discover that as a child, the author lived in Canada but was actually from Hungary. And next thing you know, you're discovering what it sounds like to speak Canadian with a Hungarian accent or, which has nothing to do with the book.
Yeah.
But I love that. I do love that sort of research side of things. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the joys of the job, I would say. When narrating an audiobook, what features in a project most excite you? What turns a book you're narrating into a favourite? Do you look for characters? Do you look for story? A mixture? Well, what is it?
Do you know, I don't actually know. There's a connection again. Usually it's a well-written book. The characters are fully formed. The author has actually put on the page all the thoughts they have. They haven't imagined things but then left them out because it didn't matter in the story. So I've been able to absorb all the information they had about those characters and actually really live it. And I think it's the living it that I enjoy. So I did a book written by Rena Rossner called Sisters of the Winter Wood, which I didn't think would be the kind of book that I would want to interpret. And yet it's a fantasy Jewish folklore book about two sisters. Yeah. But it's so beautifully written. It was absolutely fascinating. And it's those kinds of books that you come to the end of and you don't want to move on. Like when you read a book, you want to live with those characters some more and you want to be in their world. I think that's what attracts me. And unfortunately, you don't know that until after you've started the project.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's one of those things where, I mean, on my own experiences, I've had the pleasure of narrating books that I wouldn't necessarily pick up in my free time. And I've come away thinking, do you know what? That's the best book, professional or personal, that I've read this year. And I think that's just another aspect to it where, we're really lucky being exposed to so many different types of varied material. And you can come away with thinking, do you know what? I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Very much so. I think at the beginning of my career, I was surprised. I would be reached out to by authors who would say, I've heard your demos and I think you'd be really good to read my book. And then I would receive their book and I'd go, why? What did you hear in my voice that you thought this would, and then even with producers, when you get cast, you wonder what it was they heard or what it was they were looking for. I'm often cast for some reason as the outsider, that voice that says, we're looking for a general American man, but how about this British woman? And every so often they go, hey, that works, which I find fascinating. Often people don't know what they like until they hear it, which I find a lot more in the corporate world. I'll often be online with people and they'll say, if you could just give us a read and we'll give you an idea of what we're looking for. And I'm like, that's kind of backwards, but sure, we'll do. It's that kind of thing that, and I know I appreciate it because when you go shopping for things, for example, for the house or whatever, and you need a particular thing in a particular space, and you think you want something really specific, I went out shopping looking for a rectangular folding table for my kitchen. I wanted it to fold against the wall so it would be smaller when nobody was here, and then I could get it out. I currently have an oval non-folding table in my kitchen because I fell in love with it. I went into the shop and it was perfect, and it is perfect, but it isn't what I thought I wanted. So I often think of that when authors are looking to cast their books. They go out thinking they want a particular thing, and then they hear something and they go, oh, actually, that's it. Because that falling in love, that matchmaking, that's what it's about.
Oh, 100%. I think that's lovely as well. I think you find that in a lot of creative pursuits. And I think it's vital in creative pursuits that you have to keep that, you kind of, even if it's subconscious, you have to keep an open mind. And I think it must be really rewarding as well as a performer to be, to know that you are so different, there's sometimes the opposite of what they think they want. And then you give a performance that they think, hang on a second, no, I'm going to go against everything that I originally thought, and I need to work with this person. That must be pretty rewarding as a performer.
It's lovely. It's also initially it's a little bit daunting.
Yeah,
the imposition of that kind of idea of talent. I think particularly as a midlife changer, I was kind of surprised and thrilled that anybody wanted me to read anything for money. I was just really wow. And I think at the beginning I was kind of, why did you think I'd be able to do all these accents? And then at the end of the book, I'm like, I can do all these accents. Suddenly your resume grows and your experience grows. Every book kind of teaches you something. And I think the good ones are the ones that stretch you that little bit, that make you have to go to your accent coach and go, they're asking for a Southern Ireland, but I keep on going into Northern Ireland, or whatever. Yeah. And having to work at something to then make that great project is a lovely feeling, particularly afterwards. I can't remember who the narrator was, who said, I love narrating books after they're finished, which is a great way of putting it, because the project, when it's ended, is always brilliant. It's a lovely project to have undertaken, but sometimes during it, you're so kind of filled with self-doubt and these worries and this wanting to do a really good job that you sometimes forget to enjoy it. And I think the enjoying it is super important.
Yeah, I couldn't relate more. This brings me on to, I read a blog post of yours back from March about freelancing and advice for freelancers. And you spoke about 3 areas to be aware of. There were boundaries, communication and respect. Now, all 3 I found brilliant, but the topic of respect, about having to take yourself seriously and how that can be hard in creative pursuits, it really resonated with me. Would you be able to expand on this topic a little bit, and perhaps your experiences of how to handle self-doubt or doubt from those around you, etc.?
There's two main things. So the respect one is really about acknowledging how important this pursuit is to you. So when I began, I had a partner who said he was supportive, but then would query why I had to spend so much time doing this thing. I would, sort the house out, make some food, send the children off to school, and then sit down to do it. And he would inquire whether it was really necessary at this time, despite the fact that he was very supportive in words. And I think my lack of respect for myself didn't make me create good enough boundaries that said, between these hours, this is what I want to commit to. This is what I'd like to focus on. And because I wasn't able to do that, I ended up leaving him so I could narrate audiobooks, which sounds a little extreme. But it's about that sense of expecting other people to respect you for what you do when you don't necessarily respect yourself. And it's that self-doubt, that inner critic that we carry with us all the time that really upsets me. My life goal is actually to... I've become so aware that confidence changes our voice so much. A sense of self and awareness of self affects how we voice things. And so I'm desperate to kind of remove self-doubt from anyone and everyone, because it's of very little use to us in the creative pursuits. It stops us jumping off a cliff without a parachute, but it shouldn't stop us from attempting a Scottish accent or recognizing the places we do have really good talent. One of my favorite phrases is that we're all underwhelmed by our own abilities. And I think it's a recognition of that, an awareness of what we actually offer, allows us to become sufficiently confident in ourselves to actually sell ourselves to the authors and producers who need to cast books and want to create audiobooks. So the whole process is part and parcel of the business we're in.
Yeah, I think that's such an important topic. I love that quote, by the way. I think that's brilliant. This topic leads itself quite well, I think, to a discussion I had a few episodes back with RJ Bailey, specifically about looking after one's mental health while growing yourself as a business or a brand, putting yourself out there. Getting rejected from jobs frequently is, of course, all part of the job. Have you any advice on how to step away? Because it can be quite hard to switch off, can't it?
Very much so. I'm particularly this year, my word for this year was reframe. I was suddenly aware that I was being very singular-minded, if that's a word, about how I thought I was perceived within the industry. And every so often I have to stop and reframe. You send an email off to a producer and you say, I'm a British voiceover and I like to narrate historical fiction and non-fiction, and if there's anything I can help you with at all, and crickets. You get nothing. And I used to think, well, they obviously hate me and they're never going to employ me. And there would be this ongoing kind of every 3 months I would get myself to reapply and send out and nothing. And the reframing allowed me to acknowledge, and the experience, in fairness, to acknowledge that the question I love is, what else could be true? And when you ask what else could be true, suddenly maybe they don't reply to emails. Maybe my emails all go to spam because of the filter I've got on my system. Maybe they only reach out when they've actually got a book that fits me. Maybe they already have 17 other British female voiceovers on their books and they aren't interested, and don't have the time to reach out and say, stop writing to us because really we're never going to employ you. But anything could be true. And so doing more research, listening to people on podcasts, listening to interviews, stuff that you do like this, where you can actually go and listen to how people react and interact, makes you acknowledge and realize that it's not always about you. In fact, it's very rarely about you. It's more often than not about how much time they have, how busy they are, what books they actually have on their desk at the time. There are so many other things going on. And we spend a lot of our time just being very insular and very internal about how we feel, when actually all we can ever do is offer ourselves up. We offer ourselves to the industry. We say, this is who I am. This is what I offer. Another of my favourite things is the 33%. There's this concept that there are 33% of the industry that love us, 33% of the industry that hate us, and 33% of the industry that couldn't really be bothered. And apparently we spend 80% of our time trying to convince the people who really aren't that bothered that we're brilliant, when there's already 33% of the people who adore us. So why are we not focusing our efforts on the people who already love us and just doing better work for the people who want to hear it? And the same is true in our relationships, in our families, in our social networks. There are people who, dislike us and we tend to avoid them. But the people who aren't overly bothered, we seem to spend a lot of our time worrying about what is it that's not making me sufficiently interesting to them? Why aren't they concerned for who I am? And the people who love us, we kind of take them for granted. And so it's just really important sometimes to remember that there is a very large group of people who like what we do. You know, even in reviews and things on Amazon and so on, you'll see, I'll see a review that says, I would listen to anything Ana Clements narrates. And underneath a review that said, I had to return this book because I listened to chapter 1 and I couldn't bear her whiny voice. And when you see, when you've been here long enough and you see enough reviews that are so contrasting, and that the majority are actually positive, but our systems, our brains are made to protect us from the bad stuff. And so the bad stuff stands out. The bad stuff remains with us so that we can protect ourselves from it, when actually it shouldn't matter so much. We should be focusing on the good things, on the people who want us to produce another book and are waiting for the next book to come out so that they can listen to it. And there are those people out there for all of us.
Of course. I don't know quite why our brains are hardwired to look at the negatives, but you're absolutely right. And I think that's a great takeaway just for life in general, is to, it's all about that thing of, there's certain things that you're never going to be able to control. So it's, whether people will resonate with what you're doing, or, there just might not be your audience, or for whatever reason. And just to, as you say, always focus on the things that, we can contribute to, and get something positive back. You also host Audiobooks Club and the Wednesday Audiobooks Room on Clubhouse, as well as Wednesday Welcome on the Narrator's Cup of Joe. By the way, since we're recording this on the Wednesdays must be incredibly busy for you.
It's a big day.
How has being hands-on with the audiobook community helped you grow as a narrator, and how important is it for narrators who are new to the industry to reach out and join groups such as these?
It's huge. I mean, my first 5 or 6 years, I felt like there was nobody. It was a bit of a wasteland when I began, and I'm aware that there was nowhere for me to go and ask these questions, or to share my knowledge, or have people share their knowledge for me. And so I spent a lot of my time researching. And luckily for me, I love doing that. I love investigating and taking notes and checking stuff out and finding out things. And when Clubhouse began for me in January of last year, and during the pandemic, I live alone. It was a lonely time.
Sure,
and suddenly there was this community of people that I could turn on and chat with for with no complication, no issues, no nothing. And I couldn't find any other audiobook narrators. So I found this group of VOs who were doing 2 or 3 rooms a day. And I would wake up in the morning and the LA VOs were still, it was called the Night Owls. And I'd say good morning to them while I was having my coffee and stuff. And we'd chat and they'd discuss their day and whatever. And so I began the Audiobooks Club in an attempt to find a space where audiobook narrators could come together, just to be able to find other people like me. And what's been really lovely is that it isn't my club, it's everybody's club. And so what's happened is we have now 7 or 8 rooms a week run by different people who want to share the information they have. There's an industry chat room on a Tuesday. On a Monday, there's a practice your audiobook narration room. On a Thursday, there's a narrator focus for people with ADHD and different, issues with scheduling and troubles doing that sort of thing. There's 2 rooms on Sundays that are just, the one in the afternoon here in the UK is a technical chat. It's run by a couple of producers from Ladbroke Audio in South London, who basically talk about microphones and soundproofing and all the different kind of hardware kind of stuff, that as well as audiobook narration itself and production and so on. So it's become, and we've actually got a couple of new rooms opening up. Once a month there's a promote your indie audiobook. If you've got a book that you've just released and you want to talk about it, you can get in touch and then be on the room once a month to talk about the book and have people perhaps go listen to it, hopefully. And then somebody else is starting a new room, but it's this kind of growing community of people offering their time to chat about audiobooks because we all love it. It's a real, it's a passion project. It's a real feeling of kind of, I want to be able to, initially for me, it was a space to ask questions and discuss them. And then it became people coming along and asking questions and getting answers to their questions, hopefully. So if anybody had something specific that they wanted to ask, it's the embarrassing stuff sometimes, isn't it? Like, what's the difference between an RS and an RH? And actually, they're not the same at all. It's those sorts of things that people sometimes feel they can't say out loud because in theory they should know. So where do you go to ask? And the Narrator's Cup of Joe, for me, once a month I do a beginner's Zoom where people ask that sort of question. And it's a safe space to do so, which is, I'm all about the safe spaces because there's a lot of poking fun and ridicule about. So it was really important for me to kind of have a space where people can just chat and have opinions and for us all to have a bit of sort of intellectual humility and understand that people come at things from very different places and from different ideologies, don't they? So
yeah. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think that's really great. I think there seems to be this thing. Maybe I was going to say maybe creative people. I think I think the majority of people all sort of share this little. I wouldn't say fear, because that might sound a little overpowering, but this just sort of this worry that we're all going to be found out for not doing something right, or for being a fraud or whatever. And I think that just chatting to people, asking about people's processes and as you say, asking the, quote unquote basic questions, which may not be that basic at all, but, asking those questions, it just sort of helps you reconnect and realize that we're all in it together and we're all sort of thinking the same thing, more or less.
Very much so. And that, like you say, that connection, I think, is really important. I think we forget sometimes it's a very isolated business, isn't it? You're sat in your box with your computer sending off emails that nobody replies to. It's a bit of a bit of a strange place to be. And I apologize for always talking in quotes, but another of my favorite quotes at the moment is all fear wants is reassurance. Yeah. And I think sometimes we forget just to be nice to ourselves, just to go, a bit of a pat on the back. You finished a book, you got a book, you've sent 2 emails today, whatever the things are, ticking off your to-do list is actually a really acknowledging the effort you're putting in is really important sometimes. And I think looking back as well and seeing how far you've come. I know I forgot to do that a lot. And it's important to remember, if I'm as far forward in 5 years' time as I've come in the last 5 years, I'm going to be outstanding. So
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important. I had the pleasure of on this last Sunday going on to the Sunday Schmooze chat with Neil and Morrison. As we had the last guest I interviewed for the show actually was Neil Gardner.
Oh, lovely!
And he was wonderful, and I'm interviewing Morrison in a few weeks' time as well. It was just great, and so I had the opportunity to go on to the Sunday Schmooze and chat a little bit about the show and listen in and things. Because I must admit, I'm very embarrassed to admit this as somebody who earns their living in audio, but I wasn't aware of Clubhouse, or I'd heard the name, I didn't really know what it was, wasn't really that invested in finding out, it seems. And then as soon as I was sort of they told me about the show, and I came on to have a look, and I thought, I've been missing all of this.
It's funny. We the Wednesday show. I run it now with a lady called Ana Caputo, who very kindly. So when I started in Clubhouse, it really was just me, and so I started the Audiobooks Club, and I would open a room, and I didn't really understand how it worked, but it was still just me. And so understanding the algorithm, understanding I had to leave the room open for half an hour before anybody was even notified that a room existed, all the kind of technicalities to it took several months to put together. And then people would come and they would want to listen to me. And I'd be like, okay, I can chat, I can talk the hind legs off a donkey, but there's only so much people want to hear, So I would do 10 or 15 minutes and then I would say, if you wouldn't mind coming up to chat with me, maybe you want to ask a question or you could share a story and then we could talk about it. Yeah. And sometimes there was this deathly silence because people were kind of curious about it too. They were kind of aware that it was this space, but they weren't sure what it really meant. And so it for me, it became almost like a radio show. Every Wednesday at a particular time, I was going to be there regardless. And once people started knowing that they could count on me to turn up, they started turning up. And now I will say it's just me up here and then, like I said, Ana Caputo joined me and she now brings in a guest once a month. So once a month we get to chat for an hour with a producer from one of the production houses or whatever. And it's again a way of sort of sharing the other side with narrators who we tend to hold the producers in some kind of... we're in awe of them sometimes and sort of afraid to reach out because their job isn't like ours. And actually, they're just people too, They have this long list of books they need to get cast and they just want a good job done. So I think making people realise how normal they are was quite important to me too. So it's a lovely space to be able to sort of share all that information and all that knowledge that's just hanging around, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important as well because, as you say, it can be, if you're narrating full time, or at least a lot of the time, it can be incredibly isolating. For myself, I work from home. My partner's a teacher, so she's out all the time. Being busy and busy speaking to people, and I'm busy speaking to myself. So it's it was a real privilege to go and chat with that community and feel like you may be strangers at the start, but you don't feel like strangers for very long. It's a
lovely welcoming space, and I think because it's audio, which is actually what we do, there's no need to get dressed, there's no need to brush your hair. Your voice is the only thing you're using, and the ability to join in or not. A lot of people come along, and I know they're always going to be in the audience, and I will sometimes message them and say, "Do you have a question, or would you like to come up and chat?" And they'll say, "I'm out walking my dog," or I drive at that. I'm driving at that time, but it's lovely to listen to you. So there's kind of space for everybody, whether you want to participate or just listen or find stuff out or send in a question. They've got a chat box now within the Clubhouse app, so people can write questions and then we can answer them verbally. So I really enjoy it. It's lovely.
Yeah. I think so, and I think especially if you can listen to it while commuting or doing the housework or something, it can be a really great way of passing the time. Just as audiobooks would be, I guess.
Yes.
It's really lovely. As a person, would you say that you are driven by contributing to a bigger entity? Does being a part of and helping, the wider voice actor, the audiobook narrator community bring you more joy than being, saying, like a lone wolf tackling things solo?
I think very much so. I think I have had, over the last sort of 20 years, issues with my mental health, and I have found that reaching out to help other people made me forget my worries for a little while. And that's how it started. That kind of idea of reaching out, of sharing stuff, of communicating and connecting with people is super important. I think it is very important. And I'm not I'm a private person, bizarrely, and yet I'm really happy to connect people. I love the concept of calling networking making friends. And ultimately, I have met in person, I've met very few of the people that I now call friends. And it's mostly because week in, week out, they pop up. I've, discovered that their children have graduated, that they've got a new puppy, that they, all the things that are going on in people's lives just by spending a few minutes a week with them. Make you feel that there's people out there that you could reach out to if you needed to, which ultimately is all it's about. It's about not feeling alone. And so, yes, I think helping the wider community helps us all. It helps us as individuals, but it helps everybody, doesn't it?
100%. I think it's, as you say, it does benefit a lot of people in every area, professionally because you get to ask advice and things, but also personally because you've got someone who knows, you may find somebody who knows exactly what you're going through. Who knows the exact process of the steps that you have to go through to get work, to keep consistent work, to grow, and all those things. And it's just lovely chatting to somebody who knows the details of that. You've worked with top studios, Harper Audio, Dreamscape, Audible, the list goes on. And for everything that you do for the community and everything else that you've got going on, could you tell us a little bit about how you structure your day? Are you very rigid when it comes to time management when dealing with so many different projects? Could you tell us a little bit about what's a typical day like?
We talk a lot on Clubhouse about scheduling because it's so different for so many people. And I think I realised and acknowledged that although when I go into studios here in London, the day is sort of a 9:30 to 5:30. There's a break every hour and a half. There's an hour break for lunch. But pretty much you're narrating all day. And within 3 days, you've finished a book. But of course, you've got a director and an engineer and people pressing buttons for you. And all you're doing is expressing. So it's a wonderful experience. It doesn't happen as often as I'd like. So mostly I'm just at home. And the trouble with being at home is that I'm very easily distracted. So, the washing machine might need to be on, but then I have to wait an hour and 40 minutes for it to finish. Otherwise, I can't record. And things people talk about, like having the house needs to be warm enough so I can turn the heating off so that it doesn't, that low rumble doesn't occur in my booth. So there's a lot of kind of things required to be able to just start. And that's become my nemesis almost. Sometimes if I come down in the morning and have breakfast and realize I've forgotten to put the heating on, then I decide it might be too cold if I now go in and don't. So then I have to wait another. And I used to go through this entire process of kind of putting things off, putting off whether it was sending an email or sitting down to record. And so Andy Arndt does some fabulous talks on scheduling and time management, but it made me research it, which I'm great at procrastinating by researching stuff. So I researched why I was procrastinating, and I discovered that actually if I set particular times for particular things, I could organise my day better. So basically, I get up about 7:30. I have breakfast. I water the plants. I go for a walk around the block. I do morning things. And by 9 o'clock, I'm usually sat down in front of the computer. But it's admin stuff. I'm emailing people, replying to people, investigating stuff, finishing off a course I might be taking. I do a lot of kind of independent education, as it were, where you buy the course and then you do the modules as you please, as it were. So that's one of my favourite things. So my mornings are usually that. They're usually sort of catching up with the world. And then from 2 till 6, I turn off my phone. So I narrate 4 hours. I sit in my booth for 4 hours every day, which isn't as much as a lot of people. But I'm lucky that my finances are such that I narrate probably 1, maybe 2 books a month. And I still do a lot of corporate work, so that enables me to live the life I want to live, as it were. And so if I get a book in that might have a tight deadline, I can narrate from 9 to 12 and then 2 to 6. If I needed to, the space is there for it. But I tend to organise myself such that I tell people that I narrate a finished hour a day, 5 days a week. So that's all I offer officially. If I then choose to do more than that or want to produce an 8-hour book in 1 week, I can. But I found personally that I don't deal well with pressure. I don't deal well with feeling that I can't undertake, or I can't deliver what I've promised to undertake. I like to under-promise and over-deliver.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it's a really personal thing. I know a lot of people who have full-time jobs who get up at 5 a.m. to narrate for 2 hours and then come home and narrate between 8 and 10 at night. And that's their way of kind of converting across to becoming an audiobook narrator. So I think there is so much to be taken into consideration with regards to your life, the structure of your life, who else lives in your house, how much noise there is outside your house. All of those things have to be taken, and what sort of a person you are. What time of day is your creative time, for want of a better word, because we're expected to be these kind of permanently inspired people all the time, aren't we? And sometimes it's hard, It's hard work what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think that's something that maybe isn't talked about enough. I think definitely because there is this sort of hustle culture out there where it's like or fine if you've got a full-time job, that's no excuse. If you've got kids, that's no excuse. Get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and narrate, and all these sort of things, which can be, I think, a little harmful. I very much like to be comfortable when being creative. I don't like the pressure. I find myself being very sort of restrictive, in the ideas and things that I can produce when I feel like I'm under pressure. I very much like to, as you say, give yourself a lot more time than perhaps needed to make sure that you're doing the best. And also that's good. I guess a good habit to get into, just in case anything goes wrong, as well. But yeah, I think that should be a thing that's sort of spoken about a little bit more, is that you have to create that schedule that matches with your personality. It has to be individual. There's so many different ways to do this,
Yes, very much so. Absolutely.
Yeah. Just before we run out of time, this has gone so quickly. I can't believe we've been speaking for 40 minutes already. Have you any projects coming up in the future that you're excited about that you can talk about?
I don't know if I can talk about them. I'm really excited. I can talk about one that's about to come out because they've put it up as a pre-order. So it's a book called The Speed of Light, and it's a book where I played the voice is accented English. So she speaks English with a Spanish accent. And I'm being employed now a lot more to do that. So in corporate audio, that's a really big deal. That's very much my market, is that English with a Spanish accent. Mostly because as you can hear, I have a British accent, but I speak Spanish fluently. And so I can put on an accent like my father's, which he came to England when he was 29, having never spoken English. So he has a very thick, very heavy Spanish accent, or like my mother's, who actually came over here when she was 7 and then came and went several times before she finally settled.
Right.
And so her English is by comparison, relatively perfect. But there's a musicality and an intonation and a phrasing that comes with other languages. And that I am absolutely in love with, that concept of the way people put words together because of where they come from. I just find wonderful. And so this book, The Speed of Light, that's coming out soon, I played this English with a Spanish accent voice. But I'm being employed a lot more now to do books based in Spain, where one of the characters might be Spanish, or the love interest might have a Spanish accent or whatever, that sort of thing. I'm sort of developing this niche, I suppose, or niche for, as they say, for this accented English, which is wonderful. And I think I really enjoy books that have characters who have backstories. People have complicated lives. When you get to know people, they have stuff going on. And I like books that don't pretend otherwise.
Do you find yourself as a narrator, as a performer or an artist, you could say, do you find yourself getting into those books that you can really relate with the character? Do you find ways to sort of create this connection with a character when narrating?
I think good casting is where it's at. That matchmaking, as I spoke of earlier, is key. And the reason I narrate some books well is because it feels like the character is me. I'm like, how did the author know that this is what I would do in this situation? And those ones are easier. It makes the acting easier, doesn't it? If you can resonate, if you can understand why the character would do that. But there are also books where I'll come to the end of the chapter. It says, and then she turned away. And I'll go, sorry, she did what? You sort of find yourself going, I can narrate it, but I can't believe this just happened, And I find that a lot. I should do some outtakes, shouldn't I? The stuff I say afterwards as the chapter finishes, because it's astounding. I mean, you prep the book, but when you're in the moment, I often forget, that the baddie doesn't die, or that, and you get caught up in the moment, don't you? Despite the fact that you've read the book ahead of time. Sometimes it's very exciting or very emotive. And so it's yes, the connection is, I usually find that the reason I've been cast in the book is because somehow there's something in that book that speaks to me. And if there isn't, that's what I need to find. I think that's the key, isn't it? It's finding that thing. Even if it's a non-fiction book, it's discovering why the author feels so desperately passionate about this particular thing, even if it is remote facilitation on Zoom meetings, which doesn't sound particularly exciting, but actually can be fascinating, apparently. I think that connection is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's just, again, it adds to the enjoyment, really. Or just, for myself, it does sort of make it a lot more kind of interesting, really. I think I'm going to end on this question, if that's okay. When going through, so obviously you're performing, you're narrating so many books, throughout as the years go on, you sort of can pick up traits of how stories are written, how stories kind of unfold themselves. As a reader, as a fan of story, has narrating so many books helped with the love, or has it kind of ruined it for you? Because I've heard both answers on this show before.
Prepping for me is the big deal. So prepping the book actually takes me longer than it seems to take other people. And it's mostly because I need to believe it. I need to understand what the character's going through or why they would do what they do. And I've only had 1 or 2 books that I've gone, she just wouldn't do that. Why would she go down that road, or why would she make that choice? And I haven't understood why it is. Mostly I can really see where it's going. And what I do love is the books where I think I know where it's going and it doesn't. And not because the character wouldn't do that, but because I didn't see something coming. Those are the really good books. It's like movies, isn't it? It's that moment where you think you definitely know who the baddie is. And then it's like, oh, no. So I think it's always about good writing, isn't it? If I'm lucky enough to be able to pick and choose the books I get to narrate and I get good books, and the good books have a great arc with really rounded characters who do as they're supposed to, and I'm really big on a happy ever after. I need a happy ending. I'm a real Disney girl. I can't bear it. If I've done a couple of books where the woman dies at the end, and you're like, I'm sorry, she what? You can't leave me like this. And I appreciate it's much more realistic and much more lifelike, but well, I don't read books to just do the same as I do in life. So I need to escape. I need to be taken away into a world that is different to mine and yet relatable. Which is part of the storytelling, isn't it? And getting to share that with the listeners is just wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be able to work and, make a living from creating that escapism for somebody is a true, privilege. We were lucky enough to have, at the start of when we first started this podcast, we interviewed Cara Hunter, the best-selling Penguin author, who's, amazing crime thriller mystery author out there, and just all-around brilliant person. But it was really fascinating to hear her sort of describe her process of how to create that. You've got this murderer who's who's one of you've got the set of 10, 12 characters in there, and one of them's the murderer. That one of them's the murderer, but then having to keep in mind that, as a reader's going to be saying, well, it can't be that person because that's too obvious. So it's going to be this person because they're going to be the least obvious choice. And then it can't be. And then to realize, that they have to take into all these things into a consideration to make a satisfying yet realistic.
But there's also so much that doesn't sometimes translate. I did a book some time ago that was the baddie had a Scottish accent, but so did the best friend. And they were the only two people in the book who had accents or who were described as having accents. And I think the concept was that you never quite knew who it was who was doing the thing. And it would say, a Scottish accent called them and said so-and-so on the telephone or whatever. And you weren't sure if it was the cousin or the baddie. And of course, having to... And words like an unintelligible voice came over the line. You're like, unintelligible such that I can't say these words, because what does that really mean? In audio, there are so many things sometimes that don't quite allow for the listener to have that imagination. When you're reading the book, you're kind of carrying all this suspense of disbelief with you until it gets resolved. As a listener, there's almost more information there, and you have to be careful, I think, as a narrator, not to discredit the listener. They have to be given something to do. You mustn't act too much, otherwise there's nothing left for them to interpret. And that's a fine line as well, isn't it? To walk.
It is. That's a really great point. But it's all a balancing act, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you so much once again for joining us on the show and for setting out this time. I know you're a very busy person, so I really do appreciate it. All the relevant links to social media accounts or websites, etc. And I'll also put the schedule for the Clubhouse things or everything that's going on in the week, so I really do think they're great. They can all be found in the show notes for this podcast. So that just about does it for this week's episode. Another huge thank you to Anna. It's been a thrill to talk to you. And as always, to you, the listener, for making us a part of your day.